Okay, dear friends, it's a pleasure to be with you again in another Kumi session, online session. This week we're discussing gender and violence, looking at examples from the Bible and discussing gender-based violence in the modern world. We're joined today by a friend, and actually we're happy that she is in Jerusalem, in Palestine, by Dr. Dorothy Jean Weaver, the retired professor of New Testament at Eastern Mennonite Seminary. She's going to speak today on women of empire with Matthew's narrative. We will then discuss how these biblical stories and lessons can inform our activism around the world and for Palestine. It has been the tradition at Kumi to ask speakers to introduce themselves. It's a pleasure to be for us to have you with us, Dr. Dorothy. Can you please introduce yourself?
Thank you so much, and thank you for the opportunity to be here this evening. I consider it a great privilege to be able to be with you all and to be able to present something that I've been working on. I am indeed a retired professor of New Testament, Professor Emerita of New Testament at Eastern Mennonite Seminary. I've taught there between 1984 and 2018 full-time, and then I did some adjunct work until just recently. This project this paper that I'll be sharing with you this evening is as yet an unpublished paper. I hope to get it published. And it is part of a larger project about women and empire within Matthew's narrative. And that, as I have figured out for myself, is something that I don't believe has received a lot of attention as such. Lots of people, everybody is working on empire throughout biblical studies, and lots of people, mostly women, but other people as well, are working on women in biblical studies. This is an attempt to bring those two themes together. So I'll be sharing part of this larger project, which is about women and empire. And this one is specifically about the women of empire. In other words, the imperial women. And I will just go ahead with this, and I look forward to the Q&A and or the ongoing discussion that you will have afterward. I'll be very interested to see whether this can feed into some fruitful discussion. Starting with my introduction. To reflect on the role of empire within Matthew's narrative is to ask a question which spans the gospel from beginning to end. Just think about the birth of Jesus and the story of Herod, and think about the death of Jesus and the story of Pilate, and you get the idea, and there's a lot of empire in between those two bookends. The language of imperial power within Matthew's narrative functions above all to depict a male-oriented world, and in specific, the actions of men vis-a-vis men, most prominently, the actions of male Roman officials and male Roman military figures vis-a-vis the male Jewish Jesus. Matthew's narrative is significantly at home in its first century Mediterranean cultural context, as it depicts predominantly male-male interactions. But it is precisely due to Matthew's obvious rootedness in his own androcentric world that Matthew's narrative has such power to surprise us. Rosemary M. Dowsett observes, quote, given the male domination of the culture at that time and the wholly male worldview of most contemporary literature, that is first century literature, the extraordinary thing is how much Matthew draws attention to women as well as men from start to finish of his gospel, end of quote. Nor is that all. In line with Matthew's striking tendency to exhibit irony in crucial fashion throughout his narrative, much of the interface between empire and the women of Matthew's gospel is deeply ironic in character. Here, as elsewhere, Matthew's narrative inhabits a two-story world in which appearance, that is, the way things appear to be in the everyday world, is visible on the lower level of the narrative, the level accessible to all of the characters in the story. And true reality, that is, the way things truly are from the God's eye perspective, is visible only from the upper level of the narrative. And that is a level that is accessible, that is inaccessible to the characters in the story, but it's visible to the observant reader. And this essay will highlight one specific group of women within Matthew's narrative, and they are the imperial women. On the one hand, Herodias and her daughter in chapter 14, if you have a Bible and want to be paying attention to where this is. And on the other hand, Pilate's wife. And you have to look closely for her because she is found only in chapter 27, verse 19. So you won't find her anywhere else. So I'll be looking at them and their interface with the respective powers of empire in their worlds. So first, I want to look at imperial women on the lower level, the level accessible to all of the people in the story. As I said above, Matthew's narrative offers portraits of three imperial women, Herodias and her daughter, and Pilate's wife. There is one other woman, the Queen of the South, but she isn't an actor in the story. She isn't a real character in the story. Jesus mentions her, so I left her out for strategic reasons. Arguably, the most crucial commonality that these women share, these imperial women, is their access, whether public or private, to power, namely to the king or governor in question. For her part, Herodias, the wife of Philip, brother of Herod the Tetrarch, has access to Herod on multiple levels. The issue at the heart of her story is her intimate physical liaison with Herod, who has her as his consort in defiance of Jewish law. Further, Herodias clearly knows Herod well and is fully aware of his personal and political issues with John the Baptist. And she has a direct, if conspiratorial, public channel to communicate her wishes effectively to Herod, and that channel is her daughter. Pilate's wife is not conspiratorial like Herodias, but she has similar power of access to her husband. She sends a messenger to Pilate, interrupting him with an urgent message in the very midst of his public judicial deliberations about Jesus, precisely as he is sitting on the judgment seat. The daughter of Herodias has unmediated and public access to Herod the Tetrarch as she dances in the midst of Herod and his assembled guests and speaks with Herod face to face and publicly. But beyond this prominent commonality between these imperial women, their stories diverge in crucial ways. Herodias is a woman of significant power and decisive action. She is also calculating, cunning, and conspiratorial. When Herod swears under oath before his banquet guests to give Herodias' daughter Whatever she might ask, Herodias realizes immediately that her moment has come. Accordingly, she draws her daughter into a cunning and grotesque conspiracy and sends her back to Herod with the immediate and public demand for John the Baptist's head delivered here on a platter. And the trap snaps shut. Herodias' considerable powers are easily sufficient to manipulate the king, who is a man of demonstrable weakness and paralyzing ambiguity. Herodias has effectively used and abused her daughter. She has manipulated a weak and vulnerable king, and she has succeeded in wreaking vengeance against her prophetic adversary, John the Baptist. Her power has prevailed to all obvious appearances. Her reward for her actions is the severed head of John the Baptist, staring at her from the platter she has demanded in the grotesque banquet of the vengeful and the victim. And this is Matthew's lower level portrait of Herodias. Pilate's wife, for her part, stands as a character parallel to Herodias, but in sharp contrast to her. The parallels, first, are unmistakable. These two women share similar positions as the wife or the consort of an imperial ruler serving at the behest of Rome. In addition, their stories both focus on urgent and forceful messages which these women convey by means of channels to the ruler in question. Beyond these parallels, however, the stories diverge in crucial ways. Where Herodias' motives are personal revenge against her prophetic adversary, Pilate's wife acts in response to a dream. And within Matthew's narrative, dreams are clearly of divine origin and conveyed by an angel of the Lord. Herodias manipulates Herod to bring about the death of a man who fulfills all righteousness and upholds the Jewish scriptures. The wife of Pilate, to the contrary, engages her access to power in order to save the life of that righteous man about whom she has had a harrowing dream. And where Herodias achieves her goal and succeeds with her conspiracy, Pilate's wife is singularly unsuccessful. Instead, Pilate acknowledges his own powerlessness. He washes his hands of the blood he is about to shed. He proclaims his own innocence rather than that of Jesus. He has Jesus flogged, and he hands Jesus over to be crucified. Matthew's lower level portrait of Pilate's wife reflects a courageous woman, obedient to divine messages, who stands straight and tall vis-a-vis her husband's ethical contortions, suffers many things on account of Jesus, and takes bold initiative to speak truth to power, even as her efforts are ultimately fruitless. Pilate's wife negotiates empire with consummate honesty and courage, even as she fails to bend the arc of justice on behalf of Jesus. Herodias' daughter, the youngest and arguably the least powerful of Matthew's trio of imperial women, is a complex figure within Matthew's narrative. while she is clearly vulnerable to the evil influence of her imperial elders and victim of their respective forms of parental abuse, Herodias' daughter is ultimately a crucial and decisive actor in her own right throughout the account, as evidenced by her dance in front of Herod, her demand of Herod, and her delivery of the head to her mother. In the end, Herodias' daughter succeeds in bending empire to her will and forcing the king himself to meet her demands. And this is Matthew's complex lower level portrait of Herodias' daughter. But now we need to look at these imperial women from the God's eye perspective, from the above perspective. Matthew's imperial women demonstrate a diversity of experiences on the lower level of his narrative, vis-a-vis the ultimate powers of empire, namely the king or the governor in question. And these women exhibit greater or lesser degrees of success or power in their everyday negotiation of empire. It is the upper level of his narrative, however, on which Matthew ultimately assesses the character of these imperial women and the significance of their everyday life in the halls of power. And as is the case throughout Matthew's narrative, the God's eye perspective frequently turns lower level reality on its head in ironic fashion. Herodias and her daughter are both clearly successful in manipulating the power of empire to achieve their personal goals. But they do not receive commendation from Matthew on the upper level of his narrative. To begin with, Herodias' vendetta against John the Baptist and her subsequent conspiracy to bring about his death associate her unmistakably with a biblical villain of major reputation. Here, Matthew depicts Herodias as the biblical Jezebel, a royal consort seeking to destroy the prophet of the Lord Elijah, who has challenged her husband Ahab precisely on her account. And as the Jezebel figure within Matthew's narrative, and the one who succeeds in contrast to her biblical counterpart in securing the death of her prophetic nemesis, Herodias joins the ranks of the Jewish prophet killers, whether past, present, or future, whom Jesus denounces repeatedly. Further, Herodias' Jezebel role as the present-day prophet killer within Matthew's narrative will very shortly align her with the role of the Jewish religious leadership in Matthew's gospel as they maneuver to secure the death of Jesus. But arguably, the most direct rhetorical linkage between Herodias and her daughter and Matthew's present narrative is that which Matthew borrows from his Markan source. Here, Matthew builds a link between the story of John the Baptist's death and the following story in which Jesus feeds the multitudes. Both of these stories are in Matthew 14. And Matthew contrasts the grotesque and death-dealing meal orchestrated by Herodias and secured by her daughter with the bountiful and life-giving meal multiplied by Jesus and served up by Jesus' disciples to 5,000 men, besides women and children. There could have been 20 or 30,000 people there. The parallels and contrasts between these accounts are instructive. Herodias' daughter for her part, plays the deadly counterpart to Jesus in the story. She demands the head of John the Baptist, and thus John's death, in language that is clearly parallel, if you read the Greek text and maybe even in the English text, to that of Jesus, as he calls for the bread and fish that he will multiply to nourish human lives. Herodias' daughter says, "Give me here on a platter the head of John the Baptist." And Jesus says, "Bring here to me the loaves and fishes." John's head is then served up as a solitary meal for the most powerful woman in the land, while the bread and fish that Jesus multiplies serve as sustenance for vast thousands of powerless peasants. And in the end, Herodias has a grisly and inedible head on a royal platter to contemplate, while the peasant masses satisfy, and that's Matthew's word, they satisfy their physical hunger with bread and fish enough and to spare. The outcome is clear for Herodias and her daughter. Success in manipulating and outmaneuvering the powers of empire does not ensure commendation at the God's eye level of the story. To the contrary, Herodias receives the sharpest rhetorical condemnation of any single woman within Matthew's narrative. And this condemnation ranks her not only with a biblical villain of major reputation, but also with Jesus' prominent antagonists, the Jewish religious leadership. And Herodias' daughter figures as the deadly counterpart to Jesus himself. Such is Matthew's upper-level portrait of Herodias and her daughter. Pilate's wife, by contrast, receives precisely the rhetorical approval that Herodias and her daughter failed to get. And this is approval of crucial significance. Despite her brief appearance within Matthew's narrative, she gets one verse and I believe 27 words. Despite her brief appearance within Matthew's narrative and her failure to bend the will of empire to her urgent plea, Pilate's wife ranks rhetorically alongside Joseph, the righteous man, and the wise men from the East, characters highly acclaimed within Matthew's narrative rhetoric. Like Joseph and the wise men, Pilate's wife responds obediently to what she has heard in a dream from God, and she engages her access to empire in a courageous, if futile, attempt to save Jesus, that righteous man. As Warren Carter notes, her appeal to a dream echoes the birth story in which dreams reveal God's will, guard God's purposes, and guide appropriate behavior. And her actions on Jesus' behalf clearly establish her own character as righteous, along with Joseph, the righteous man, 1:19, whom she emulates with her actions, and Jesus, that righteous man, 27:19, whose cause she undertakes. Further, while Herodias, her Matthean counterpart, ranks within Matthew's narrative rhetoric among Jewish prophet killers, Pilate's wife joins the Persian astrologers among the ranks of righteous or wise Gentiles who seek to save the life of Jesus. And she does so not merely as a Gentile, but precisely as a Gentile woman, standing against both the all-male Jewish religious hierarchy, collaborating with Rome, and the masculine powers of empire itself, embodied by her Gentile husband, Pilate. Perhaps most remarkably, however, in her role as a righteous or wise Gentile woman, Pilate's wife joins the ranks of those Jew women in the narrative who exhibit the defining characteristics of discipleship of Jesus. For their part, Jewish women follow Jesus and they serve him. Important words that Jesus calls his disciples to do. For her part, Pilate's wife suffers many things on account of Jesus. Pilate is the only character in Matthew's entire narrative who suffers many things.
It seems that we're having some problems with Dorothy's, Dr. Dorothy.
Okay, I think you lost me where I was saying that she suffers many things.
Yes, that
just
is exactly, yes.
Just as Jesus will do. And she's the only character in the entire gospel who Matthew says suffers many things. Accordingly, in spite of Matthew's unmistakable focus on 12 male disciples, Matthew nevertheless succeeds in portraying Pilate's wife as one among the ranks of Jesus' non-classified female disciples. And this is Matthew's upper level portrait of Pilate's wife. My conclusion, Imperial Women and Empire, assessing Matthew's narrative rhetoric. Matthew's narrative rhetoric with regard to imperial women reflects the ironic character of Matthew's overarching narrative. Here, there are time and space only for Matthew's underlying imperial women, even within the male-dominated world of the first century, have genuine power to wield vis-a-vis the geopolitics of the day, even as they function by way of channels, engage their respective powers of empire. They themselves are crucial actors in the geopolitical world vis-a-vis human lives, and their female power is sometimes greater than the male power of empire itself. Take, for example, Herodotus. 2, imperial women have ethical decisions to make vis-a-vis their use of power. They can take actions in line with human instincts and personal vendettas, or they can take actions that accord with divine righteousness and those who live as righteous people. They can take initiatives designed to save human life or to destroy it. They can do evil or they can do good. 3, extenuating circumstances do not leave imperial women of responsibility for the word they speak or the action they take. Neither age or resulting vulnerability excuse even a daughter and young girl for her words and her actions and their real world consequences. 4, imperial women, just as the male powers of empire of whom they make their demands, are accountable for their actions by the divine court of last appeal, that court associated with the values of the kingdom of heaven as set forth in Matthew's narrative. Righteousness central on them. The verdicts of this divine court turn the apparent realities of success and failure in the real world upside down. Those women who succeed with their evil efforts receive strong condemnation in that court of last appeal, while those who fail at their right efforts receive major approval and may even be counted among Jesus' non-classified female disciples. Such is Matthew's first century narrative rhetoric vis-a-vis women of power. And such is, by the same token, Matthew's first century call to faithfulness by all those people, women and men as well, who exercise power in the geopolitical world of human community. Let the 21st century reader and the 21st century readers understand. Thank you very much.
Dorothy,
I am here.
you want to check if your camera, we'd love to use the camera. Could we try how's the internet speed with the camera on?
I just started my video.
Yes, we see you and we hear you. So, dear friends, you're more than welcome.
Whoa, I just lost.
Maybe it's better to turn off your camera feed, Dorothy.
I can't do anything. I have to wait till I'm back up. I have to wait till I get a connecting thing again.
We hear you, but I will turn off your camera feed. We have the power.
Okay.
So can you hear me fine?
Yes, I can hear you.
So friends, for people who have questions, would like to please place them in the chat, and we will try to address as many questions as possible. If people are having problems listening to us,
I can hear you.
Dorothy?
I can hear you. I hope that I will get to see you in a bit.
If you place on, you should be able to see me unless you're also your internet.
I'm completely off. I don't have a little box that says connecting yet. Are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay. Okay, well, we'll do the best we can. I can answer questions without seeing anybody.
Yes, we will try. So we have a question from our friend Valerie. So I'm not sure if I understand the question correct, but it reads, does Esther foreshadow Pilate's wife?
Oh, does she foreshadow Pilate's wife? That's a very interesting question. Thank you for raising that question. And maybe that's another paper that needs to be written sometime. I haven't written that paper, but that's a fascinating comparison.
Many people are asking if it's possible to share your paper.
I can share the paper. I have a PDF available of it. It cannot be cited in any written fashion because it is not yet published, and it says so at the end of the paper. I have a statement that says this may not be cited until it's published. I hope that in the future I will be able to get it published.
Thank you.
So I can send it to you, and you can see to sending it to people that are interested.
Yes, we will. We will send it out with the newsletter that we send out. I just want to remind everyone, because Randy has asked a question. The Sabil, I mean, it's the Kumi entry on the website. Also, the newsletter that we send out, it is very much focused on gender violence on Palestine and Israel, with plenty of resources and reports available. We try as much as we always like to invite friends and interesting individuals and scholars to share also things that could be slightly or very much connected to that topic. So that's like, we're trying this new approach also to keep it, it's like to create a bigger variety of resources and information on the topic. So we have a question: how can we utilize these findings to women today?
Well, perhaps the first thing to say is that one of my findings is that women are significant in this story, even though it is largely a story told. I mean, the Gospel of Matthew is largely a story told about and through the eyes of men, but women are significant. And I think simply opening our eyes and observing the significant role that women are playing in society is a good place to start. There would be other things that could be said for sure. The other thing I just might say a bit more about the idea of irony, because basically I have, as I have worked with the Gospel of Matthew, I find a great deal of irony there. And the idea that people who have power discover that their power is not what they thought that it was, and people who do not have power end up receiving lots more significant focus and approval, as it were. For example, the contrast between Herodias and the wife of Pilate, I think, is most striking, because you would think that Pilate's wife is the big loser, because she loses what she sets out to do. She cannot save the life of Jesus. She does not save the life of Jesus. And Herodias knows that she has succeeded in what she wanted to do. She has killed John the Baptist. But in fact, even both of those factors are turned, in a sense, upside down by Matthew as he tells the story, because he turns Herodias into a big villain, and he turns the wife of Pilate into an amazing character who might be considered to be one of these unclassified disciples of Jesus. So I think to watch for the surprising in life, and to look at the significance of the little people, and the little people are often the women. That would be a couple of suggestions for where at least to start with this.
Very interesting. So Judith, you have a question? Please unmute. Judith, you have your hand up. Judith Förster, if you could unmute. I think Judith is facing problems. So if people would like to raise your hand and to ask a question directly, you're also able to do it. You feel more comfortable in writing the question in the chat. Yes, Judith?
I actually didn't have a question, but I've been wondering how this applies to the situation in the Middle East, the situation in Palestine.
I think that is a question for broader discussion here. I'm not sure that I'm the one that should be slapping an answer on that.
Mm-hmm.
Myself alone, I would love to hear some reflections from the group on that question, if I might. I start, as I said a bit ago, with the idea that there's a lot of irony here in this story, that women are significant in more ways than one first might imagine, and that the people on the bottom sometimes are the most significant of them all, as opposed to people who appear to be on top. Would that be a starting point for some open discussion? I would love to hear some comments.
I mean, definitely, I agree with you, Dr. Dorothy. If somebody reads, I mean, it's in the last year, I've been reading the Bible through the eyes of the crowds, and how powerful the crowds, wherever there are crowds, there's something important happening. And the crowds were not like, it was like the nobodies, the people on the margins, children, women, people with disabilities, the poor people. And they have a presence, not on an individual level, but collectively. When they're together, they force Jesus down from the mountain. They welcome Jesus. They even shout Hosanna, but they also say crucify him. The crowds are very powerful in the Bible, and because they don't have a single name or a single character for us to connect, we tend to ignore the crowds. Although wherever the crowds are present, the Gospels, there's strong stories happening, and they're influencing change. That is what has been really like, that has been attracting my personal attention.
Well, I might just add, what is actually maybe even more intriguing to me than the story of the women of empire is the women under empire. And I'm working on that part of my larger project at the moment. And just for example, the most striking story, one of the most striking stories in the entire gospel, as I think of it, is the story of the women at the tomb, the women who come to the tomb on the first day of the week. And what is absolutely intriguing about this story is that on the one hand, Matthew sets the women at the tomb over against the 12 disciples, or anymore the 11 disciples, because Judas is already gone. He sets the women over against the 11 remaining disciples of Jesus, because the women are there and the disciples precisely are not. And that's exactly why first the angel and then Jesus need to commission the women to go tell the disciples, and that's because the disciples aren't there. So Matthew does, he stands the women up beside the male disciples and says, look, they're there, and they're the ones that have to go and inform the disciples. And the last scene of the gospel where the disciples are on a mountain with Jesus would never happen if the women hadn't gone and done their job. So that's the first thing that he does in the story. The other thing that he does is stand these women up even more amazingly against the Roman Empire itself, because there are the guards, and these are Roman soldiers. And guess what happens to the guards? The angel of the Lord comes down and rolls back the stone and sits on it, as if to say, so much for that. and co-opts the stone entirely. And what happens to these big, strong, well-armed Roman soldiers? Matthew is making great fun of them because he says they fall and they become like dead men. They're terrified, they're shaken. That's his language. They're shaken and they become like dead men. And so they fall into some kind of dead faint. And here are the women standing alive and with their eyes and ears open, and they're the ones that hear the report about the resurrection. I find it impossible to imagine that Matthew somehow missed the huge irony of this story about the women who are stood up on the one hand against the male disciples who need to be informed so that they can then go to the mountain and get their big commission. And the Roman soldiers, the empire itself. Here are women who are the least of the least, and they are standing up against empire. Tell me that is not irony. And that's something for us to live with as well. That's something for us to keep in mind, that just like those powerless women were standing up against empire, so are we. That's the calling to which we have been, or the calling which we have been given.
There's a question. Why did neither Mark nor Matthew not name her Herodias' daughter?
I don't know. That's the question that unfortunately I cannot answer, is why they didn't. The gospel writers, or very often people that copied the gospels, I should say the gospel copiers, were people that didn't like gaps. They didn't like places where they didn't have the information that they wanted. So sometimes when there are different versions of a given verse in the New Testament, sometimes, in some cases, you will discover that somebody supplied a name because they just couldn't live with a vacuum. They couldn't live with a vacant name, and so they had to give a name. But neither Mark nor Matthew seems to be worried about that, and so they don't. I cannot tell you why. Good question.
We have some people who would like to ask the question personally.
Okay.
Mervyn Russell, would you please unmute?
Yeah, what always impresses me about the story of Herodias, Herod, and Herodias' daughter, and John the Baptist, is the utter callousness of what happens. And to try to relate that to the situation in Palestine, it seems to me a very, very vivid, one of the most vivid instances in the whole of the Bible, in which those in power carry out the most callous acts towards those who are defenseless. There's a person who is in prison is one of the most defenseless people that one can think about. And there are certainly many persons who are Palestinians who are held in administrative detention for months and repeated months. And also, too, one could think of the children, which we've heard about recently through a speaker for the Defense of Children International Palestine. What is happening to children in the West Bank, it is a most terrible expression of callousness. So whether it's that callousness happens at the hand of and the mind and the voice of women or men, it is still the same thing, callousness.
Oh, I couldn't agree with you more. And that's not the only callousness that Matthew gives us as an illustration. Just go back to chapter 2 and look at the story of Herod and the children in Bethlehem. Just a quick little story of my own. I was living in Bethlehem back in the fall of 2000, just as the Intifada was starting, the second Intifada. And I was asked by Reverend Mitri Raheb to write an Advent reflection for an online newsletter that they had. And first I thought, well, I really don't want a deadline. I'm on sabbatical, I'm teaching already. But my second thought was, I know exactly what I need to write about. It was very short. It wasn't very long at all. It was within a page, I think. And it was about the children of Bethlehem, because that was exactly the kind of violence that was happening just around me as I was living in Bethlehem there and listening to gun battles at night and praying that bullets or whatever would not meet their targets. And it suddenly occurred to me, what was happening then is happening again. And so Matthew is quite well aware that all kinds of vicious, that powerful people do all kinds of vicious things.
I have a question that I'm a bit for many years I've been just thinking about. I mean, it's when people think about the Middle East, I mean, today, or even at the time of Jesus, they think it was very primitive in a way, and I mean, women were on the margins. But in a way, it's just down in Egypt, there was Cleopatra, like the queen of an empire at the time, and I mean, we've had many strong female leaders in the Middle East, even not very far from a period time, not very far from the time of Jesus. Why aren't there are references in the Bible to these strong women, even like 50 years, I mean, it's 30 years just before Christ.
Thank you for asking that question, because it gives me a chance to say something about the Queen of the South. She's cut from a completely different cookie cutter in Matthew's gospel. She is a totally positive woman. Matthew does not reduce her story to irony. She is a woman. Well, maybe it's ironic that she, as a woman, is a regent herself. She is a ruler. She isn't just the wife of a ruler. She is a ruler. And she travels the globe to go and listen to Solomon, the wisdom of Solomon, as the story is. And so there is one place where such a thing actually does happen. It doesn't happen often, Omar, but there is Matthew's illustration, or Jesus' illustration. Jesus uses it as an illustration when he's teaching. And she is this intriguing woman who is big and powerful and also attentive to the wisdom of Solomon. She comes and listens to him. So she is wise. She becomes wise because she adopts him as her mentor and comes and listens to him.
Margaret?
Thank you very much, Omar. I'm Margaret Mackay, Canadian, long resident in Scotland and here from Glasgow today. I'm very glad to be part of this session, a fascinating paper. Thank you. I found myself thinking in relation to where do we see women and how do we relate to today, in reflecting simply on the splendid presentations that we have week by week under the Kumi Now umbrella, so many of them from women who are playing vital roles, Palestinian women who are playing roles in NGOs, highly articulate, well-educated women who are speaking peace and justice to power in their professional lives and in their interactions with others. I think we must really keep them very much uppermost in our thoughts in this regard. And also, I've had a few opportunities to look at the history of Palestine in the late 19th century and early 20th century. And what again strikes one is the number of highly professional Palestinian women who were active in educational institutions, for example. You can find wonderful photographs of them, you know, just looking very much the part of people who could take their place amongst gatherings of men and of male decision makers. So I think we must remember that this is a history. Women's history in Palestine itself is something we should perhaps be more aware of. And the inheritors of that earlier tradition, I think, are very much among us and working in Palestine and beyond Palestine for Palestine today.
Thank you for that. I think that's an excellent observation. It reminds me of one time I was on my way to lead a Bible study for a group of women. Sabeel, this was a Sabeel Women's Project headed up by Nora Carmi. And I was picked up. We were going to a hotel down here in Bethlehem and was picked up onto a bus that was full of women from Jerusalem that were going to Bethlehem to join women in Bethlehem. And the energy, I will never forget, the energy level on that bus was so amazing that you could have cut it with a knife. It was so thick and so strong. I thought, wow, what a bunch of strong women on this bus.
And we mustn't forget the women who were so active along with Naim Atik in the founding of Sabeel.
Oh, exactly.
We must remember them and remember them very much at this very moment. Their families.
May I just add to that too? I mean, I'm involved in various social action groups here in Canada. Margaret, we have similar backgrounds, obviously. I am impressed at the caliber of the younger women who are involved in these activities. Most of them, I don't think, have any connection probably with the church whatsoever. In that way, they're like Pilate's wife. They are the righteous. They understand that we have to be understanding. We have to seek for reconciliation. We have to promote the well-being of people and the environment, and so on and so forth. They have the characteristics of the righteous. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you all. I mean, I want to thank you, Dorothy. The hour is up. We try not to go over the hour. Thank you very much. Thank you all for being part of today's event. It's an amazing paper. We hope to be sending it to you as soon as we receive it. We will send it to everybody who has attended this meeting. In Palestine, actually, I have a friend who's a Muslim scholar, and he wrote a very interesting article, because in Islam, it used to, it is in Islam, scripture says, or the teachings of Islam, Orthodox Islam says that women should not leave the house without the protection of a male guardian. And actually, this has really changed in the First Intifada, because Palestinian men were not allowed to leave the house, at least because they were all under the threat of being arrested by the Israeli army without a woman guardian. But women were always playing a role. So many times when I would be arrested as a little kid, it was these women who would, like, they were like committees in every neighborhood, and they would attack every military jeep and pull us, the kids, and they would say that this is my grandson or this is my son, and we've never seen these women before. And we were the children and the grandchildren of so many different women who no books have written about them, but they have really, it wouldn't have been possible to do any revolution without the power of these women. And the Bible is speaking about not anywhere in the world, not any continent, but this continent, and this country, and this land, the Holy Land. So these, in a way, are also not biblical women; they're also Palestinian women. So, I hope that this is also a reminder for everyone.
Hey, just before you close us down, I finally show back up. Here I am. Wow. Too bad it didn't happen 20 minutes ago.
Maybe it did, and we just completely forgot about it. So maybe it's the irony of it is maybe like you would also be like a hidden.
Oh, I just want to thank you again for this wonderful opportunity to engage with the folks, even if I couldn't see them for much of the session. But thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you all, and stay tuned. We hope to see you next week. And actually, next week we're having Mais Nassar from Kairos, a young Palestinian Christian who's going to be speaking about Kairos, Palestine, the document of Palestinian Christians. So in love, in solidarity, let's stay connected, and let's keep the movement alive. God bless you, and see you next week.
Bye-bye.